One of the most curious geniuses in human history, Leonardo da Vinci. He was an engineer, a scientist, an anatomist, and an inventor. He seemed to embody the entire Renaissance within a single mind. Leonardo was born on April 15, 1452, in a small farming village near the town of Vinci, Italy. His father, Ser Piero da Vinci, was a local notary. His mother, Caterina, was a simple peasant woman. Because Leonardo was born out of wedlock, he often lived with his father and step-siblings rather than with his mother. He spent most of his childhood in the rural areas around Vinci. He would spend hours watching birds and insects, curious about the science behind these creatures. He carefully observed how a bird moved its wings, why water flowed in curves, how plants grew, and many other such things. As you can see, our Leonardo wasn't just looking, he was truly observing. One of the notes he wrote later clearly illustrates this. Learn how to see. Realize that everything connects to everything else. Leonardo's interest in nature was not merely simple curiosity. He tried to understand everything he saw by translating it into drawings. From a young age, he had begun to depict the movements and creatures of nature with his pen and paper. As the years passed, Leonardo grew up and had to choose a profession for the future. However, because he was born out of wedlock, he could not inherit his father's trade. While this might seem like an unfortunate situation at first glance, it would actually turn out to be his greatest stroke of luck. For his father, Ser Piero, had recognized Leonardo's talent and shown his drawings to the famous Florentine artist Andrea del Verrocchio. When Verrocchio saw these drawings, he was amazed by Leonardo's talent and immediately took him on as an apprentice in his workshop. Thus, at around the age of 14, Leonardo began working as an apprentice in one of Renaissance Florence's most respected and active workshops. Here, Leonardo was not only learning to paint, he was also acquiring foundational knowledge in engineering and mechanics. Thanks to his studies on the human body, movement, and perspective, he had already begun to merge art with science during this period. Moreover, Florence was the heart of the Renaissance at that time. The city's environment of art, science, and culture rapidly expanded Leonardo's horizons. For this reason, the years he spent in the workshop are considered the most crucial starting point for him becoming the Leonardo da Vinci we know today. By the early 1470s, Leonardo had become one of the most talented apprentices in Verrocchio's workshop. The Baptism of Christ, one of Verrocchio's most famous works from this period, is recognized as a significant piece that showcased Leonardo's talent. According to art historians, one of the angel figures in the painting was most likely painted by Leonardo. This angel figure stands out for its soft texture, lively expression, and detailed use of light and shadow, and possesses a distinctiveness that differs from Verrocchio's style. Some sources suggest that after Leonardo's contribution, Verrocchio ceased painting and left the angel figure in the painting to his young student. This event is viewed as Leonardo's first major success in art history. In 1472, when Leonardo da Vinci was about 20 years old, he was admitted to the Arte dei Medici Speciali in Florence. This guild was considered the official institution of the Florentine art world, and membership allowed an artist to practice his profession officially. Leonardo was no longer just a student in Verrocchio's workshop. He was a young artist recognized for his own talent and projects. During this period, though it may be hard to believe, Leonardo had also designed a self-propelled car. This vehicle contained a powerful spring mechanism, a gear system, and a steering mechanism. According to the design, the spring was pre-compressed, and when released, the resulting energy was transferred to the wheels. This allowed the vehicle's direction to be mechanically set in advance. Today, some engineers consider this design to be one of the first robotic transportation vehicles. This example demonstrates just how talented and forward-thinking Leonardo was, even at a young age. In 1482, Leonardo da Vinci decided to leave Florence and move to Milan. This decision would mark a significant turning point in his life. At that time, Milan was one of the most powerful and wealthiest cities in Italy. The famous application letter Leonardo wrote to enter the Duke's service upon arriving in Milan clearly demonstrates just how versatile a person he was. In this letter, he introduces himself not primarily as a painter, but as a military engineer and inventor. He explains that he can design war machines, build lightweight yet durable bridges, and plan city defense systems. At the end of the letter, he adds the following words: "If all this is deemed insufficient, I can also serve as a painter and sculptor in peacetime." For Leonardo, possessing the talent for painting was as natural as breathing for an ordinary person. After settling in Milan, Leonardo worked in the service of Ludovico Sforza for approximately 17 years. Here, Leonardo worked on numerous projects as an artist, engineer, and scientist. He even began studying human anatomy to depict the human body more accurately in his paintings. To this end, Leonardo examined the bodies of deceased individuals in hospitals and medical schools, researching their organs and muscles. Of course, he did not conduct these studies alone. He collaborated with doctors, particularly in Florence and Milan. In fact, this method was also used by some artists of that era. For example, Michelangelo, one of the great geniuses of the same period, had also studied human anatomy to make his sculptures more realistic. If you'd like to learn more about this great artist, you can also find a video about Michelangelo on my channel. Much of what we know today about Leonardo's work comes from the thousands of pages of notebooks he kept throughout his life. Let's take a quick look at one of these notebooks. One of the most famous drawings in these notes is the Vitruvian Man. This drawing depicts a naked male figure with outstretched arms and legs. The figure is actually drawn in two different positions at the same time, one inside a square, the other inside a circle. This, of course, is no coincidence. Here, Leonardo was attempting to demonstrate the mathematical and geometric proportions of the human body. One of the sketches Leonardo worked on most in these notebooks was his flight designs. The first of these was the ornithopter, a bird-winged flying machine. Leonardo first studied the flight of birds and the movements of their wings, then designed the ornithopter based on these observations. The logic behind the design was this: a person lies in the center and uses their legs and arms to move the mechanical system. Thanks to this mechanism, the large wings would flap and the machine aimed to fly like a bird. However, we now know that human muscle power was insufficient to make such a machine fly. In other words, the design was impractical. Nevertheless, this idea is recognized as one of the earliest designs in which humans began to conceive of flight mechanically. By the way, Leonardo often wrote his notes in mirror writing. That is, he flipped the letters and wrote the text from right to left. Therefore, a mirror was needed to read it. Historians attribute this to his being left-handed, but some also believe he wrote this way to keep his ideas secret. Here's an example showing just how fascinating a person Leonardo was. Another of Leonardo's famous flight designs is known as the aerial screw. We can describe the structure of this machine in simple terms as follows. There is a vertical shaft in the center, and at the top there is a large, spiral-shaped fabric surface. People stand on the platform below and the shaft is rotated. This causes the spiral surface to push the air downward, with the aim of lifting the machine upward. Of course, this design wasn't actually feasible with the technology of that era. However, as an idea, it was remarkably forward-thinking. In fact, many people today consider this design to be the first concept of a helicopter. Another drawing found in Leonardo's notebooks is a parachute design. This parachute was intended to allow a person to fly safely. The parachute Leonardo designed was pyramid-shaped. In his own notes, he wrote, "If a person has a tent made of linen fabric with each side measuring 12 braccia, they can jump safely from any height." This design bears a striking resemblance to modern parachutes. In fact, in 2000, a skydiver built a model faithful to Leonardo's design, and it was proven to work. Thus, Leonardo's idea was theoretically correct. Now let's take a look at Leonardo's military designs. One of these is an armored tank. He drew this design as part of the military proposals he prepared for Ludovico Sforza. The tank was circular in shape and covered with a conical armor resembling a turtle shell. Numerous cannons were mounted around it. Inside, soldiers used a crank mechanism to turn the wheels and move the tank. The design's shape was intended to allow for firing in all directions simultaneously. If you think Leonardo's military designs were limited to this, you're mistaken, because at that time, Milan was one of Italy's most powerful and strategically important cities. It was constantly under the threat of war, and therefore there was a great need for new weapons, defense systems, and military engineering. It is truly astonishing that a person in the 1400s could be so forward-thinking and have such a vast imagination. especially since we haven't even gotten to his most important works yet. Another of Leonardo's military designs was a massive crossbow. This was a wooden crossbow approximately 27 meters wide, mounted on a wheeled platform. The bowstring would be tensioned by a large mechanism, and during firing, it could launch large arrows, stones, or incendiary projectiles. In fact, Leonardo designed this weapon not for practical warfare, but to create a psychological impact. His idea was that when the enemy army saw this massive weapon, they would be overcome with fear. In addition, Leonardo developed numerous military and civilian bridge designs. One of these was a self-supporting bridge with a rather intriguing structure. This is because it could be constructed without using a single nail or fastener. The principle behind it was that the wooden pieces would interlock and hold themselves in place. Even today, some of Leonardo's bridges are used as examples in engineering courses. From this, we can see that this genius, who lived in the 15th century, possessed the vision to imagine technologies ranging from tanks to helicopters centuries in advance. Leonardo even designed a diving suit. According to his sketch, this suit would be made of leather and consist of a mask, breathing tubes, and air bubbles to keep it afloat on the water's surface. The purpose of this design was to secretly swim underwater, to approach enemy ships and drill holes in their hulls. However, Leonardo was unable to complete most of these projects. One reason was that the technology of the time lagged far behind Leonardo's ideas. Another reason was that Leonardo had a very curious personality. He would start a new project before finishing the previous one, then a new idea would come to mind, and he would decide to bring it to life. Now let's take a look at Leonardo's projects that didn't remain mere sketches but were actually brought to life. For example, Leonardo designed a robot knight for the festivities held at the Milan palace. This robot was shaped like a knight wearing metal armor and contained cables and gear systems. Thanks to the mechanism Leonardo developed, the robot could sit, raise its arms and turn its head. Can you believe it? Nearly 600 years ago, this genius created a mechanical robot. Personally, I couldn't help but be constantly amazed while researching Leonardo da Vinci for this video. Another significant work Leonardo created during this period is the painting The Last Supper. This painting depicts the moment, according to the Bible, when Jesus told his disciples, "One of you will betray me." Jesus sits calmly and resignedly at the center of the table, surrounded by his disciples. Seated immediately to Jesus' right is the young and serene John. He has bowed his head and wears a sorrowful expression. Peter, standing beside him, wears an angry expression. It seems as though he is questioning the one who will betray Jesus. Judas Iscariot, meanwhile, typically stands slightly behind the other apostles, holding a small money pouch in his hand. He is depicted as the one who will betray Jesus. Andrew has raised his hands, filled with fear and anxiety. James and Bartholomew, standing on the far left of the painting, appear stunned and shaken by the events. Now let's look at the disciples on Jesus' left side. Immediately to his left, Thomas is making a questioning gesture with his fingers. His face bears the expression, "Will it really happen?" James, standing right next to him, has his arms outstretched. He is stunned and amazed. Philip, meanwhile, stands in astonishment with his hands clasped over his chest. When we look at the trio beside them, Matthew, Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot are also whispering to one another in astonishment. The objects on the table, the food and wine vessels, seem to have transformed an ordinary meal into a scene of psychological tension in an instant. The light streaming through the window in the background of the painting highlights Jesus as the very center of the scene. Thus, the entire scene creates a dramatic and striking effect. Leonardo's works from this period are considered one of the strongest examples of the fusion of science and art during the Renaissance. In 1499, Milan was occupied by the French army. This event did not bring about a major change in Leonardo's life, for King Louis XII of France was aware of Leonardo's reputation as an artist and engineer and held his work in high regard. For this reason, he permitted Leonardo to remain in Milan and continue his work. In fact, according to some sources, Louis XII was so impressed by Leonardo's The Last Supper that he even considered bringing the painting to France. However, since the work was painted directly on the wall, this was not possible. It was precisely during this period that Leonardo began work on one of history's most famous paintings, the Mona Lisa. In the painting, we see a woman sitting calmly at first glance. Her hands are elegantly placed one on top of the other. For this reason, some people are disappointed when they first see the Mona Lisa, expecting something more dramatic or striking. However, if you pause for a few seconds and tune out the crowd, you'll notice that a profound psychological portrait has emerged before you. At first glance, the Mona Lisa appears calm and slightly smiling, but when you look at the painting again, it seems as though her smile deepens. Her eyes, meanwhile, create the sensation that she is following you. To achieve this effect, Leonardo employed the techniques of sfumato and chiaroscuro. It is said that he even studied the muscles of the human face to capture the Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile. But of course, that's not the only reason the Mona Lisa is so famous. Its true fame came from the painting's theft from the Louvre Museum in 1911. The incident made such a huge splash in the global media that even someone with no interest in art today would recognize the painting immediately upon seeing it. What intrigues me most, however, is who stole the painting and why. Perhaps if Leonardo had made the Mona Lisa a bit larger, the thief would have struggled to carry it and changed his mind. But then the Mona Lisa wouldn't be the Mona Lisa we know today. Let's get back to the topic. In the 1515 King Francis I of France held Leonardo in high esteem and invited him to work at his court. Leonardo had created a mechanical lion, one of the designs he produced during this period, for Francis I. This lion could take a few steps and walk using a mechanical system. Moreover, the lion's chest opened and lilies emerged from within. These flowers were the symbol of the King of France. Through this design, we also learn just how romantic and thoughtful Leonardo was. After that, everyone wondered what else Leonardo could create, but unfortunately, the years had passed and Leonardo had grown old. Thus, on May 2nd, 1519, Leonardo da Vinci passed away. He left behind not only paintings, but also thousands of pages of notebooks, drawings, and ideas. When we look at his work today, one thing is very clear. Leonardo was not just an artist. He was a genius who pushed the boundaries of curiosity and the human imagination.